It is one of the most controversial things that when I talk to HR leaders, they get terrified. Do you think that people should work while they are on leave?
I really think it depends on you, your personal preferences. What do you even mean by work? What's the purpose and intention of them working? Why are you feeling the need to work? Because there is a real upside in allowing other people to take things on while you're on leave.
Well, I am excited today to talk to Danielle Pickins about should parents, employees work while they are on parental leave? And this is kind of a funny question that is very niche and maybe very specific. Although the reason that I wanted to discuss this with you, Danielle, is that it is I think one of the most powerful questions and topics that come up over the course of our Parentaly coaching. Mm-hmm. It is the thing that we consistently get feedback when we ask for feedback from people who go through our program of what was really helpful. And they point to this. They point to documenting their communication preferences and being more thoughtful about if they will have any sort of communication while they're on leave. They always talk about how that's really valuable. And it is one of the most controversial things that when I talk to HR leaders, they get terrified by. And I understand why they're terrified about it. And so I find this fascinating because it seems like there is a little bit of a disconnect between what we see works and what is slightly controversial. And maybe even I'd add a third thing to the mix, which is very difficult to do in practice. And so we have a million things that I want to dive into. I am going to start with the most broad question of, do you think that people should work while they are on leave? And I'm intentionally asking it in a way that is very broad and open because I want to hear how you would answer that question.
I love this question because I don't think that there is a right answer to this question. I really think it depends on you, your personal preferences. What do you even mean by work? Some people opening up their laptop and just checking their email doesn't necessarily feel like work. You know, some people, if they have to put together a presentation, that feels like work to them. So that to me is probably one of the most essential questions is like, what do you even mean by work? Is it just like, hey, keep me updated, let me know what's happening, keep me informed? Or is it like, I really need to think about something and write something down for you? So that would be how I would answer it. There isn't a right way.
Do you have a definition of, let's say, let me put it this way. If someone comes to you and they say, I'm unsure about what I should do while I'm on leave. And I've got all these things and I feel like I need to remain connected in some way. Where do you take that in a coaching session?
Well, I'll ask them kind of why are they doing that? What's behind that? What's the purpose and intention of them working or staying connected? You know, is it coming from a place of, I kind of want to know or be informed of what's happening so that I can make my own plans? Is it coming from a place of like, I feel like I need to be there and no one else can do this? So I'll often ask an individual first and foremost, like, why are you feeling the need to work? Because there is a real upside in allowing other people to take things on while you're on leave, right? Like it allows them to grow. It allows you to step back, get some additional perspective, get some real presence with your baby. So for me, there can be this feeling of my team is really overworked. I feel guilty taking time away and they're wanting to work for that. But if they're wanting to work because, you know, they want to keep something moving that they're really excited about. And to be honest with you, sometimes like there is work that you want to keep moving forward and you may not be able to talk about poop 24 hours a day when you have a baby. Here is what I will say. What I recommend for people who are having their first child is always promise less, right? Like, you know, like if there's something that you really want to ask me about, sure, fine. Do I want radio silence? That's okay too. You can always give more, but it's hard once you say like, I want to be in total communication with you to pull back. So for your first child, always promise less. I will tell you by my third child, personally, I was like, I need something to keep my mind stimulated. This actually feels like a break from caring for 3 children.
Yeah. It's so funny you put it that way. The way that I always put it is build in optionality and set the expectations as low as possible, because you can always dive back in, but you can't always pull out. And so like set the bar really, really low of what you will do. But if you can see what's happening in a way that you control, then you're able to decide in the moment. Because there's also this aspect, like I totally agree with you. I think for your first child, oh my gosh, don't promise anything. You have no idea how you're going to feel.
No idea.
Yeah. And even with my third child, I was still surprised. I mean, my plan with my third parental leave, which again, very different. I'm the CEO, founder. So it's a very different consideration when you're stepping out for parental leave at that level. But I had said I was going to keep Slack on, but don't expect any response from me, but I'm going to monitor things. In the hospital, 12 hours postpartum, I realized this is such a mistake. I thought I knew. I'm like, it's my third kid. I know what I'm doing. It's going to be easy. I've got a nanny. I've got my husband at home. I've got my parents around. I've got so much support. And I realized I could not turn off the work thoughts, and that was really doing a disservice to myself. All right. And so you can always change too. That's the other thing that I talk a lot about is like, if you realize you want to be able to say, I made a mistake.
Yeah, I think, that is just really good thinking for parenthood generally. It's like, I need to change things. Like, this is not working. I need to change things. And so being flexible is really important. It's funny. I was just on a call a little while before this with a Parentaly coaching client. And I said I was going to be joining you for this topic. And I said, what was your biggest surprise or aha? And this person said, I thought, well, maybe I'll think about work while I'm on leave. And the person said, like, I didn't think about it the whole time and it felt fine. So even sometimes the anxieties that you have before leave, like it becomes totally different once you have that child in your arms, and you can make different choices and just say, you know what, everyone is going to be okay. Things will be fine.
Yeah, totally. And I think you realize once you step away, it's kind of like on vacation where you leave on vacation and the first few days you're like thinking about work. And then by the end of the vacation, once you turn it off, you realize, it's gone from my head. And I hate to even use the word vacation when I'm talking about parental leave, but it's a similar idea in that once you've shut it down, I think most people are surprised by how little they care about work. And that's a good thing.
Yeah, I think most people, they think, I'm going to be thinking about this all of the time. And I do think if you stay connected, it is harder to shut it off. So in the beginning, I'll usually recommend to folks, if they don't have any idea, if they're like, you know what, Danielle, I don't have any idea. What should we do? I'll usually recommend for them to just, have a blackout period of 6 to 8 weeks, right? And then see how you're feeling. If you're feeling like, I want to understand what's been happening, then you could put a little toe in. Maybe check your email. Maybe talk with a friend who's at work, right? Sometimes it's just fun to get the gossip of about what's happening at work. But I really believe in, giving yourself that time and space when your baby is first born to just be and allow yourself to be there. And then if you want, start to dip a toe back in.
Right. And I think just to pull back a little bit and provide some context around why even people should be working or be connected. The way that I always describe this when I talk to companies, where companies are taking this perspective of, we are giving this paid time off because we want you to completely focus on your family, shut down everything about work. You should not be in communication. Many companies actually shut down systems access, so you don't even have access to your email. And they're coming from such a great place of, we are doing this thing for your benefit. And what I always have to educate them on a little bit is, I totally get that is great intentions, but think about the potential unintended negative consequences that can come out of this. You're having someone step away for 4, 5, 6 months who deeply cares about their career trajectory. There may actually be things that it is in their best interest to be a part of, or at least hear about while they're on leave. And so what I always try to bring this back to is, all we care about is giving them agency and allowing them to make that choice within reason. Now it's tough because I've worked with people who basically their plan is to work while on leave. And that, yeah, I want to give you agency, but that's also, we know, not the right decision for most people. So that's where it gets a little bit tough. But I do want to say, like, the entire idea behind this is simply there are certain situations where it is good to have some sort of connection. I have pretty strong opinions about what those are, but I'm curious to hear from your experience coaching people, what are the things where you believe very deeply, yes, them being connected about this thing while they were on leave? Like, if you could explain or give an example of how did that meaningfully improve their return to work experience or ongoing career trajectory?
Absolutely. Well, first, I just want to say, I believe that companies should set the expectation that you shouldn't be working while you're on leave. Like, otherwise, why am I giving you leave?
Right.
But I also believe in treating people like adults, right? Like, you don't need to take away my system's access. And I'll tell you, when people come back, they're like, I can't even figure out how to set up my email again. So that's one thing that I would say, like, set the expectation. We don't expect you to be here, but don't, lock everything down so tightly that it feels like this really negative experience for folks. I think the situations in which I would see people, being in touch, I'm not going to say working on leave, is if something impacts their job. So I'll often say to folks, you might think, like, I don't want to talk to anyone during leave, but what if your manager leaves? What if a position that you've been really excited about comes open and you want to apply for that position? What if there's something that's going to dramatically and materially affect the job that you're in, right? The role is changing. There's something, it's not necessary that you're going to do the work around that, but maybe you want to at least give your opinion or perspective so that people feel like they have some ownership, so that when they come back, they're not completely taken aback by the shifts and changes that have come their way. So that's generally how I think about it.
Yeah. And it's funny because I was being interviewed for an article yesterday, and I was asked to give some examples. And I said, well, I'll share some personal examples. I've had 2 direct reports go on leave in the past year. Mm-hmm. Both of them, I have contacted them while they were on leave about the things that they told me were most important to their career when they returned to work. So in one situation, it was a really fundamental piece of this person's job. And so I texted her and I said, hey, we're about to make this decision. I can either delay the decision until you're back, or if you want to, talk about it now, I'm more than happy to do that. It's totally up to you. And she said, no, I want to talk about it now. She was at the end of her leave. It was her 4th child. You know who I'm talking about. So she said, 4th kid, I've got support systems in place. I've been out for 14 weeks at this point. I'm feeling really good. Let's just hop on a quick call. I worked around her schedule. We did it then. And I recently did a similar thing because actually he had reached out to me saying he wanted to talk about something that he knew that we were working on. Yeah. And so I think that there are ways, again, I like what you say, like treating people like they are adults. If they say they want to talk about it, but they also know that they don't have to, and that I've made it very clear, no, I respect this. I will delay it until you're back. Then there are ways to do this in a way that does feel very supportive to the person, knowing that they are being, I'm still investing in them even while they're out.
Yeah. I think this piece around just giving people options. Hey, here's kind of some ideas. We could talk about it when you come back. We could talk about it now. We can work around your schedule because what baby has a routine or schedule when they're just born anyway, is so important. There are other times when I think that a person's voice can be heard during their leave that I have often advised folks. So sometimes people will say, we're doing strategic planning, but I'm going to be out during that strategic planning time. So they'll say, I don't necessarily want to call in. What should I do? And so I'll say, okay, well, you generally have a sense of how strategic planning goes. You've been with the organization. Could you draft an email or draft a memo and send it for around the time that strategic planning is happening, to say something like, hey, I know that you all are getting started with strategic planning. I would love for you to consider these 3 things. And that way you've used your brain before you've gone out. You've kind of, so that you can also be present when you go on your leave, so that you're not like having these thoughts still hanging out there. You've written something, but you've also delivered it at a time when people are starting to think about it. Because sometimes people will say, well, should I talk about it before I go out on leave?
Right.
I say, you can do that. And the way most people work is they hear something and then they forget about it until they really need to use it. So if you send an email or a memo at the point when people are talking about it, you can still have your voice heard in that situation.
I love that. I've also done a lot of thinking about the opposite, which is when people are trying to work more on leave and it's unnecessary. And this actually happened to me yesterday, where my direct report, who is currently on leave, said he was going to run a sales call that was really important. And I said, no. I mean, why? Well, it's really important. It's really important. And I had to convince him, no, you've been out. You're rusty. I'm going to do it. What are your concerns? He walked me through his concerns, and I promised him that I would address them, and so I do think that this is where it gets hard. It's not like, yes, he's an adult. He could decide. And by the way, we should talk about the legal implications. Parentaly is a very small company. There are no laws that he cannot work while he's on leave. I could have fired him for going on leave. I didn't have to give him paid leave. And so we're actually outside of the legal world with Parentaly. So sure, he can, I guess, decide that he can come back to work early. But I think it's also healthy sometimes to really, you mentioned this in the beginning, of pressure test why. Where is this coming from? And is this even a good idea? Because certainly I can take the sales meeting. Why does he need to do it? That doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. And so one of the things that can be so useful to think about in this scenario is something I call the hidden no. By saying yes to taking this sales call, what might this person be saying no to? And you really need to be explicit. So they're saying no to potentially that time with their baby. They're saying no to allowing others on the team to grow and step up. Mm-hmm. They're saying no to the presence. And there are trade-offs, right? So sometimes people say, I'm okay with that trade-off. But I always encourage people to think about, what is the hidden no behind this? Like, make it explicit. Because this often will happen when you go back to work. Well, I'll take that meeting at 5:00. Yeah, that's fine.
Right.
It's okay, right? It becomes like a very slippery slope. But by saying no, or by saying yes to that meeting at 5 p.m., I might be saying no to having dinner with my kids, picking them up from daycare, having that only time that I can have with them, while they're awake, before they head off to bed. So are you comfortable with that trade-off? So for me, this idea of, what am I saying no to if I say yes to this request? And so just going back to why am I doing this is so important. And does it really need to happen? Could someone else do it? Because you don't have to do everything.
And what will happen as a result of doing this? Once you start to step back into work, you're in. Right. And so I said to him, it's not even about the sales meeting. Like, I didn't even really care. It's half an hour of his life. Fine. But now you've gone to the sales meeting. Now you're going to have to own the follow-up. Now you're going to worry about it. Now you're going to be thinking about all of the next steps there. And am I following up on it correctly? And now you're back in and you're worrying. And this is your last week of parental leave. That's not right. And so I think that there is such a push and pull here. And just to sort of go back to the legal point, because that's always the pushback from companies is, who is this illegal? And the truth is, it is a slippery, it is problematic for some companies. And I'm not a legal expert, but my understanding of this is most large companies, they are beholden to FMLA. Mm-hmm. So they fall under FMLA. Employees are allowed to have a job protected unpaid leave for 12 weeks. And I think the language that is used, because I've researched this before, it's around like, you can't disrupt the leave. So it's not that you can't talk to them. You can communicate with people who are on leave. And that's where it gets really difficult, because companies get nervous, where they're like, well, what is disrupt? Right. So yeah, I think that is important, is that, and the other thing to keep in mind is that some companies will fund the first portion of a birthing parent's leave with disability, in which case you can't work while you're on disability as well. So there are certainly legal implications, but what I always push companies on is, okay, there's working while on leave and there's staying in touch, and that is different. But it is scary. It's scary for a large company because they think, yeah, but if we tell our 50,000 employees it's okay to contact someone while on leave, it opens up those floodgates of, well, we don't know what they're going to do. And do they understand what keeping in touch means versus work? So I understand why companies say do not talk to them. It's tough.
I feel like this is such a tricky question for me, and I'm not sure what my perspective is. So I'm going to work through it with you. I do think that if you have a shorter leave, let's say 4 weeks or less, because maybe you're splitting your leave, I would generally recommend to people to just try to totally disconnect, right? It's so hard to get that time back, and you're likely not going to regret the time you spent with your little one. And if you can't even take 4 weeks of leave without having someone else manage your work, like that seems like a broader sustainability and talent management problem on your team that you should probably discuss. I think when your leave is a little bit longer, so much is shifting and changing that there comes a point where there might be decision points where you want to be able to give your opinion. And that to me feels like, especially if you're in a more senior role, it could be important to at least give your opinion as the year goes on. What about you? What are your thoughts here?
I think that's right. I think it depends. I also think like for companies that are changing really quickly, I think you'd be surprised that, or you, not you, Danielle, but the expecting employees, I think that they're surprised by how they really don't need to do any work in longer leaves because everything has changed. So their ability to dive into certain things is very low because the context has changed and there are new people at the organization. And so it becomes less of, oh, I'm going to need to do this thing, and more of they might want to get updated. And I've seen that a lot where people realize towards the 4-month mark, it would be really nice to just connect on more of like a social chat basis with my manager. How are things going? What's exciting? What's not? What are you most worried about? Others think, oh, I am so glad to be fully disconnected. And so I think it really depends. I think one thing that's fascinating to me is there are these things in Europe that are called keeping in touch days, where, but again, they're taking 1 year to 18 months of leave there. And so for them, they have found that it is actually really helpful to have these dedicated work days where maybe after 6 months or 9 months or whatever, there's 1 day of work in quotes where it's not really work. It's sort of getting a lay of the land so that you continue to stay connected. I think with these longer leaves also so much of keeping in touch is beginning to lay the foundation for your return to work. Your role will look different. It just will. And do you really want to walk back in and not know anything that has changed and you have a new childcare setup? It's so shocking from a life perspective to go back to work. I personally would not want to also be completely shocked at everything that's going on at work. I want a little bit of like a soft landing.
Yes. I love the idea of a keeping in touch day, not so that I have to do anything, but so that I can just process what's happening. So I don't come back and it feels like a fire hose and this deluge of information where I'm like, now I have to think this through. Because as you get towards the end of the leave, you do start thinking about, what do I want to be doing when I go back to work? So that can be a really helpful way. I often will recommend to folks about a week before you go back, just schedule a 30-minute check-in call with your manager. It could be social to just say like, hey, look at how cute my baby is. Tell me what the big priorities are. But just so you have a clearer sense and you're not walking back in that first day saying, oh, actually, I don't have the same manager, which you would be surprised how frequently that happens. In the beginning, I thought, maybe it'll happen once every, couple of times. It was happening almost, 30% of the time I was talking to people. They would come back, they would say, oh, I came back to a totally shifted team, to a totally new manager, to a totally new scope of work. And so, you want to be prepared walking into that totally different, and it feels almost like whiplash.
Yeah.
It can be so disorienting that you go, I'm not really sure that this is where I want to come back to. So at least helping people mentally prepare for this with these keeping in touch days could be important.
We've run several parental leave audits with Fortune 500 companies where we survey all of the people who went on leave in the past, 2 years, and we ask them questions about their experience. And it is shocking what you said, how many people had new managers when they returned. And the most consistent feedback was nobody told me while I was on leave. Mm-hmm. So I found out either through the grapevine or when I returned to work. And I am furious about that.
Yeah. Think about how that feels.
Oh, they said nobody even bothered to tell me that my manager's no longer at the company. I mean, it feels horrible.
It's the worst. You come back and you're going like, I thought I had this champion.
Right.
And now I have this new person. I mean, I've had people, this is not just like some thought out there. This is actual, people who are coming back and they're saying, I thought I had a manager. We talked about me being promoted when I came back. And now I have someone totally new and I have to start all over. And yet no one told me, there has been no groundwork laid. And I feel furious. And like, it's right to feel furious. That is not how you treat people who are really important to you and your business.
The other interesting thing that I've noticed, and this is a little bit of a promotional comment about Parentaly, I've had several people say when this happens to them, thank goodness I had my coverage plan done. And not just the coverage plan, but all the other documentation that we have people do before they go on leave. Because I was talking to someone who gave me feedback and she said, everything was documented. My communication preferences were documented. All of the stuff that I had discussed with my manager was written down in terms of our plan for my return to work experience and what I would be doing. It was already documented before I went on leave. So the new manager saw it and was able to actually fall in step with what we had discussed. So I think it's just like the switching manager, switching role, all of that stuff, it happens so often and people don't understand how often that happens and how life-changing that is.
Yeah, and you almost can't fault the new manager for it, right? Like they're walking into a new scenario too. They're like, I don't know the conversations that you had. So I do think, the best thing you can do is really do that documentation before you go out. Have those conversations. Make sure that it's written down somewhere so that you can point back to it, so that people have at least a roadmap to start from. Now, of course, things shift. They change while you're on leave, but at least there's something there, which is why, we'll often say to folks, make sure that you get a performance review before you go on leave, even if it's a little bit out of cycle, or get at least something so that if you come back and things look more, ground zero from point zero.
And I will end this on a high note, which is one of, I think, the biggest surprises I've had in doing this work is seeing how often people fully disconnect. They go on leave and they start to realize they want to do more impactful work and they are so excited to come back to work. Partly because they've done a lot of great work with Parentaly coaches before they go on leave, but also just disconnecting and clearing out the details, getting out of the weeds. That can also be a really helpful conversation to have while you're on leave. When you are approaching that return to work moment, you will likely have more clarity about what is getting you really excited. And that is a good thing to discuss with your manager. And so you don't need to wait until you're back your first day. To your point, Danielle, we always say as part of the standard Parentaly program, have a call before, 1 to 2 weeks before you're back at work with your manager. That is a great thing to be discussing and to be thinking about while you're on leave. You don't need to be thinking about the projects or the clients or whatever, but pay attention to what you miss while you're on leave.
I tell people this all of the time. I will say to them, think about what would make you really excited to come back to work? And what are you like, you know what, I'm not as excited. How can you start to craft your role in a way that people have been doing that work? Maybe they were doing it really well. Maybe that's work that you offload. You don't have to come back to the exact same role that you left. And I think having that conversation of here's what would make me really excited to leave my adorable, cute little child every day just makes it that much easier to come back. And you will find that those folks are committed and ready. So it's just a forcing function for you to really think through, what do I want? And that's why I think that the parentally work is so important, because it allows you to step back, reflect, and then move forward.
I love
In a
it.
different
Perfect
direction.
ending. Well, thank you so much for your time today. This was great. I could talk to you for hours. I think this is just such an important topic, and I think it is important for managers and company leaders and even expecting employees to hear this conversation and to understand where this can be really helpful and how to build an optionality into their world so that they continue to have agency in their career and what they want to do when they return to work. So thank you so much for your time.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Allison.
Thanks for listening to this episode of The False Tradeoff. Make sure to subscribe if you like what you heard, and give us a follow on LinkedIn to continue the conversation on all things working parenthood and parental leave. Is there a topic you'd love us to cover in a future episode? Drop us an email at hello@parentaly.com. And if you're looking for support on preparing for parental leave, head over to www.parentaly.com. We have checklists, guides, and other free resources to help you make the experience a little bit easier. That's PARENTALY.com.